a resident in town, but as a moderator.
And about your experiences as a moderator.
Well,
for the last how many years, John?
I've only been a moderator now for I think about 4 years, maybe a little longer because I was subbing for
succeeded
Neil for a while he was sick. But anyway, Jack, perhaps we can start off as when did you move into Topsfield?
Moved into this house the day after Christmas, 1957, and we've been lethargic and stayed here ever since. Until now, we're in the process of moving out. We were, as a matter of fact, the first people on Kinsman Lane. The Lewises moved in across the street about a week after we did. And somewhat from the beginning, both Sue and I got involved in town politics or what have you. She was on the regional school committee for 2 terms in the mid-1970s. And I was appointed to the long-range school planning committee by Sergeant Wellman back in, I guess, 1958 or 59.
Masconomet was already been constructed.
That's right. Masconomet had been constructed, and that was Sue was on that committee, not the building committee,
but the regional school committee. Okay.
And this appointment of mine was to the long range planning committee for the elementary schools.
Oh, okay.
Just in Topsfield,
the local school. Yeah. Okay.
Which was really quite interesting. We traced in order to make a projection of the town population and the school population, we traced the population back to 1900. It was interesting that the town's population never varied more than about 200 people from 1,000 from 1900 to 1950. Then in 1950, the curve started up, and by the late 50s, it was almost going up straight.
That's interesting. When you got involved in that, how many elementary schools were there?
Just one.
Just Proctor?
Just Proctor, and there had been one addition to Proctor at that time, and I believe there have been at least 2 since.
Yeah, probably.
1 or 2, and then, of course, the Stewart School.
The Stewart School, of course, was built, and that's been rehabbed and added to recently.
Yeah. then I don't want to monopolize it.
No, you go right ahead.
When we moved in, we discovered that there was a piggery, actually in Boxford, but just over the line up at the end of the street. And the people on Coleraine Road really got the worst of it. We weren't bothered by it too much, but they asked me to try and help them get rid of the piggery. And I don't know, we appeared before the selectmen several times and actually sponsored a couple of articles for a town meeting warrant to limit the weight of trucks on various roads, deliberately aimed at Coleraine, which did not fly. But that wound up in the fact that when Sergeant Wellman, who was the town moderator, had a heart attack in the fall of 1961, I believe it was, just before a special town meeting. And Jim Castle, who was a selectman, asked me if I would run that town meeting, which I did. And then Sergeant Wellman died between September of 61 and the spring of 62, so I ran in 62. And that started your... Yeah, right. And it was a great experience all years.
So you served as a moderator then from 62...
Right. Till about 1990, I think.
I think so.
I think it was 28 years, so it would be,
I'll bet you that's probably about the longest serving moderator in the town history.
I'm not sure, John. There was a fellow named Balch, Franklin Balch, who was a town moderator for quite a while. And then in the early days, I say early days, I know back in the 19th century, the moderator used to be elected at the town meeting.
Oh, okay.
And would alternate. Somebody I've forgotten. Oh, Charles Francis Dow was elected several times. Early in the 20th century, Walsh would be elected. I've forgotten. I don't know just when they made it a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
Not full-time.
Full-time.
Annual election.
Annual election. Yeah. That's always kind of. I can't. Have never really kind of figured that one out either, because we have to. Why is it only for a 1-year term when selectmen go for 3 years and so on?
I think they want to be able to throw you out if you offend too many people.
If you offend too many people at the town meeting.
Have you had any obstreperous people at meetings that cause you trouble?
I really haven't. I've been fairly fortunate in that. I know I go back in my own history back into the town of Winchester, where we used at that time when I was a boy, it had just turned to a limited town meeting, a representative town meeting. But and you could go to town meeting, as I always did. My father insisted that I go and watch, and there were always 2 or 3 people that you could count upon that were going to get up and object to this, that, or that, the other thing. Didn't matter what it was, that they were going to be on the opposing side. Right. But I haven't seen that in Topsfield. What was your experience?
I think the people in Topsfield are really pretty civilized about this thing. I can think of only one time when I told one of the boys on the floor with the portable mics to take the mic away because 2 people got into an ad hominem argument. And I've forgotten what it was about. I think I could remember who they were, but I don't think
Not necessary to name names.
But that's the only time I can think of when it...
I think I can remember that time. When you had to say to somebody, and I forget who it was, that we're not going to have a name-calling contest or, let's be civil about this. And that's about the only time I remember you having any problem.
I think it's probably the only time there was. As you spoke of being able to anticipate who was going to object and what would happen to them, it got to the point with me where I could tell that if certain people spoke against an article, or whatever side they took, the town was going to vote the opposite. The 2 or 3 people, and they always spoke, not that they did or say anything offensive, but they just turned off the crowd.
Yeah.
And you probably...
No, I have the same, basically the same opinion. And people will come up to me before the meeting and say, well, I want to get up and I want to say something, and I always tell them that's fine, that's your right, that's what we're here for. But my advice to you is keep it short and don't go on very long, because you're going to lose people, and often that will turn them around the other way. So just beware of that. And that's about my only advice to them. But,
the other thing about people in Topsfield, there's nobody very contentious in the sense of I never experienced anybody trying to outguess me on how to run the meeting or what the rules were. There's an old case that I was always ready to cite by book and page called Somebody versus Grafton, I've forgotten, which holds that the procedure at a town meeting where you have no bylaw that sets the procedure or no rule book like Robert's is in the long-standing tradition of the town and the discretion of the moderator. And I was always ready to cite that. Nobody ever gave me the chance.
Yeah, nobody's ever questioned me either. And of course, you have the advantage of being an attorney and being schooled in that, and I'm not. And that's always worried me a little bit, but nobody's ever challenged me, and I always have felt that, hey, as far as I'm concerned, it's, I just say this is run by the moderator, and we try to use our common sense, and we try to keep things on an even keel.
Yeah.
And that's always seemed to work.
I do remember one time when there was a very disputed item on the warrant. It had to do with one of the additions to Masconomet, and it was a time when we had so many people that we had to have the cafeteria out and back used for overflow, and the town was divided on it quite evenly. So when the time came, somebody moved for a secret ballot. We had a secret ballot, and so Beverly Guarino, whoever was the town clerk then, maybe it was Helen.
Probably Helen.
Yeah, Helen. What's her name? Thompson.
Thompson.
But we were all ready for it. We had the slips in the ballot box,
okay.
And so they started voting, and I saw people I had never seen before come up and vote. You know, they dragged everybody, both sides, dragged everybody out, and then a lot of those people who just went right out the door and left.
Yeah.
And it suddenly occurred to me, this is a time when, if there's a real parliamentarian here, he or she is going to make a motion to reconsider the thing after these people have left. But nobody did it. So I think the warrant, the Finance Committee recommendation failed, and we went another few years before we had the addition.
Yeah.
What do you do in preparation for a meeting, John?
What I do is basically is I take the warrant, and I actually type the warrant out on my own page, and then I type in the recommendation of the Finance Committee and who is going to speak on it from the Finance Committee and anybody else that I would happen to know about. That's about it.
And you probably also check the required vote.
Oh yeah, no, I put down on my piece of my paper here as to is this a majority vote or is it a 2/3 or whatever.
There's one thing I think that is a 4/5 vote, which is to celebrate the anniversary of the town.
Well, there's that, and there's 4/5, and there's 90% if you're going to approve a bill for a prior year.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But
a bill incurred in a prior year. Yeah, that's right. Those are just weird little quirks.
Little quirks of state statutes, I guess.
Do you use a manual? Do you use that town meeting time manual?
I use the little red book.
Yeah, town meeting time.
The town meeting. Yeah. I have that.
That's what I use.
And I always take it. I review it and read it before the meeting, a week or two before the meeting, and then I just take it with me. And I frankly have never ever had to open it up and refer to it.
I don't think I ever did. I always had it with me, and I'd read it through or skim it through before a meeting.
Yeah.
I've got this someplace around here. There's a copy that's all underlined and so forth.
No. Actually, Neil Monquist gave me his copy to use, and I've retained it since. And I do maintain a membership in Moderators Association.
That's a good idea because you can pick up.
You can pick up things. They send out little reminders here and there, and I figured if I ever had a real question, I could call somebody up and discuss it with them. So I haven't had to.
There was a time when I was the moderator in Topsfield, and there was a guy named John R. Kimball who was the moderator in Linfield. he was a lawyer too. We'd get our mail mixed up, phone calls. And actually we became quite friendly.
Good friends.
Yeah, over the years. He was in the association, and we'd meet out in Auburn. We used to have
Yeah, out around Sturbridge.
Yeah.
They usually have their annual meeting out there.
Yeah. I don't know. I think of some funny things that happened, like the time we had, I think it was a thunderstorm during a meeting, and the lights went out. Do you remember that? I finally took out my cigarette lighter and lit it, and then Red Stoltz got the power back on. Yeah.
Now that's interesting. The funniest thing that ever happened to me was a few years back. Was that we were getting along. It was about I don't know, 11:15, and maybe a little before 11. But anyway, we had about 5 or 6, maybe 7 items left to go, and I was looking at my watch, thinking I'm beginning to lose the crowd, and I hope somebody doesn't ask for a quorum. But I thought, well, if we keep at it, we'll make it. And just about the time I was thinking that, the fire alarm went off. It had a false fire alarm, and everybody got up. I says, meeting is adjourned until tomorrow night, and that was the end of it. We had to come back the following night.
I remember once early when I was in the early years, somehow I was under the impression that if I lost the quorum, we were going to be shut right down without anybody calling. So as people got up and started to leave, I announced that if they kept leaving, I was going to lock the doors. And they kept leaving. Finally, Ted Williams was the constable, and I called Ted over and said, lock the door, which he did, and they lined up. And then when we got through the meeting, and Ted came over and he said, they're talking about suing you and me. And I checked it out and discovered where I was way wrong in that one. Ted was a nice guy, too. There were the town people who were active in the town meetings, like Ted as the constable, and Red Stoltz, and of course Beverly now. Helen Thompson, and Alice. Yeah, Alice Castle was originally.
Yeah, she was way back. Yeah. But,
I think the funniest thing that ever happened, and I've said this many times, so you probably all know it, was the time there was a brush chipper on the warrant for the highway department, and we got to it, and the finance committee recommended against it, and it created quite, there was quite a stir of conversation about it back and forth, people in favor of it, people against it, and finally Wallace Nealon got up, and Wallace started talking, and you could almost envision him taking you on a tour of the town. He was in the Widow Perkins' backyard, and then he was up Prospect Street and down South Main and so forth. And he finally finished, and there was absolute silence for a minute. And then Selma Williams raised her hand, and I called on her, and she got up and said, I still don't know what a brush chipper is, but if Wallace Nealon is for it, so am I. And the place burst into applause, and it voted unanimously, I think. I think even the finance committee voted for it. Wallace was always one you could count on to speak, and when he spoke, he took the crowd with him, rather than turn them off.
And another one that I would remember, and yes, Wally was, you could always depend on him. If he came up, you could depend that the town was going to go with Wally. The other one was John Nutter.
John Nutter, and his trees.
And his trees. Yeah. You could depend upon the fact, whether it was trees or anything else, if John got up and made his pronouncement on it, this was a pretty good indication of how the town was going to go.
I can remember for years, John would come in with, say, $2,500 for trees. The finance committee would cut him to $1,500. John would talk it right back up, and he'd get it, 25.
I know when I served on the finance committee, and I was on the finance committee for about 6 years.
That's right, you were.
Mr. Chairman for 2 or 3 of them anyway. But I learned early on, you didn't muck around with his budget. Just might as well.
You actually you've held more offices in the town than I think anybody I can think of.
Well,
you've been finance committee,
selectman,
moderator, the chairman of the
ZBA.
The zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
enough.
that shows a lot of devotion to this little town.
Well, it's fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's fun, and as long as they have the time and the stamina and the energy to do it, then.
And it's kind of interesting that there has always been, or most of the time, there has been somebody who somehow had the time and the stamina to do it. Remember Bill Abbott? Was a select man and he was a lot of other things.
Yeah. There's been a good number of good
Phil Kendall.
Yeah.
That was way back.
It was way back. Yeah. I think that's before my time. But, yeah. What, you've been, obviously you've been around here well over 40 years, 45 years or so. What do you see as the most challenging thing in the coming before the town in the future now?
It's been a little while since I gave much thought to that. Part of it is, I think we're probably over the phenomenon of rapid growth. I think maybe water and sewer maybe in the future sometime, which is going to be expensive. And by the experience we're going through with septic tanks. I don't know. How about you?
I don't know. I like you. I came here in '72, and I think the town population. You had mentioned it when you came in. The town population had been steady for some time, and then started going up on a straight line. When we moved in here, I think in '72, the population of the town was roughly 5,300, somewhere in there, as I recall. And from '72 until fairly recently, it stayed pretty stable. It
under
got
6,000.
Under 6,000. It got 58, 5900. But it stayed that way.
Yeah.
And then I noticed in this latest census now we've just bumped over the 6,000 mark. But there isn't that much growth anymore.
Right, and there isn't that much land.
There's not much land. With the Coolidge estate handled the way it was, that took out an enormous amount of developable land that is not going to be developed. And I don't really know of any, there was some places, there was some land, the Atwood land out behind where I am, that's been developed but also put into conservation.
Has the rest of it that hasn't been developed been put into?
Yeah, and that was part of the deal. They could build 1 acre lots over there, so many of them, but they had to devote some 35, 40 acres to.
Well, that's good.
Permanent. It's now deeded to the town.
Good.
Which frankly is lovely because it backs up to my place.
Then there is, I think that used to be called the Phillips Estate up off of Cross Street, I think it is. But I think that has run into fairly big and a few
I think so.
houses.
Yeah.
So I agree, there isn't much to be.
Buzz Burroughs' place, that's only 15 acres, and I'm not
Is
sure
that going to be developed?
I don't know. Last I talked with the executor of the estate, he was trying to see if he could sell it off in one piece, but at most it'll only be 4 or 5 homes. So
that's a lovely old.
That's probably the oldest house in Topsfield.
You think so?
Yeah, that's what Buzz always sold.
And I bet you didn't get a word in edgewise.
No way. I used to buy For the last 2 or 3 years of his life, I'd buy Buzz's paper, Sunday paper, every day, every Sunday.
Yeah.
I go down to Gillies and buy his paper. And I go up, unless I was out of town or something, I'd go up and sit down with him and deliver his paper. And that was always worth an hour to an hour and a half.
A nice old guy.
Oh.
I used to see him, this must have been before that, because I would see him down at Gill's. He had an old station wagon and a little dog. And he'd be reading his paper in the car or what have you, and the little dog would run around and then jump through the window into the car, which I guess was Buzz's signal it was time to go home. Well, that was
an interesting group up in that area because there was the Burroughs and the Atwoods. And then across from the Atwoods, where the Browns now, Mrs. Brown now lives, there was somebody over in there before. It was a summer house before they bought it. But they were all Melrose people.
Really?
They were all Melrose people. And Buzz was Melrose, but it was her parents, the Pattons, that had bought that home, that house, and that homestead. And the Atwoods had come from Melrose, and they bought up all of that acreage. And as I say, there was somebody else down around in there that was Melrose, and for some reason they all came out there and they bought up their land and they preserved it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Very nice. Going back to the other subject, I remember certain of the finance committee members over the years. Some of them that did really great jobs. You were one of them, Brownie Marine. You remember Brownie?
Yes,
Marine?
oh yeah. I remember Brownie.
And I remember the night Brownie died. Forgotten who the chief was. Moore. I've forgotten his first name, but he called me up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he said he hated to tell me, but Brownie had died, and they had tried to save him, and they couldn't. And John Sanger was a selectman; he was out of town, and Gil Stewart was a selectman; he was out of town. So the chief said, "So Jack, you're in charge." And I didn't know what to do. Finally, I said, "Well, gee, all I can say is put the flag at half-mast." And that was it.
No, I think Brownie died not too long after I moved into town.
It would have been because they named the auditorium after him at the bicentennial.
Yeah, it was in the mid-'70s that he passed on.
He was a good guy.
He was.
When did you become involved with the Historical Society, Jack?
Well, I think I joined it about the first year we moved to town. And I think really, when I first really kind of got active in it was just before 1992, when the witchcraft ceremony started up. There was a committee. Joe Bateman was the chairman of it. Joyce Bergson, I've forgotten who all else was on it. Oh, Dot Leach, and we put together did some research, put together a pamphlet, and then Ann Pierce found the stone up at the cemetery and got Shepherd, what's his first name? Steve, yeah. So I guess he put it into a front end loader and drove it down and parked it on the common and set it straight so that it could be read and so forth. And from then on, I guess I've been as active as I could be. I wish that I could have been more active when we built the barn, but by then my back had started to go and I couldn't do much physically. We did raise some of the money though for it.
That was quite an undertaking.
Yeah, it was.
It really was. I frankly
That's
was
Norm
not-
Isler. It's really
I was not involved. Really have not been involved much in the Historical Society.
well, it's been interesting and rewarding as far as I'm concerned. I am continually amazed at Norm Isler. He's got more energy and drive.
Yes,
than,
no, he really
five
does.
other
And,
people.
when Curtis gave up the reins, Curtis Campbell gave up the reins, I thought, I wonder who's going to take things on. And boy, Norm certainly has. And
He sure has.
Done a marvelous job.
Other thing that Norm and Peggy both are trying to do, and somewhat successfully, is get some younger people involved. Some people that I met, that last time we had a lunch or a dinner down there. Several young couples, which is
that's good. That's great.
If anything is going to keep the thing flying, young people.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to miss Topsfield.
When do you move?
Well, when we sell the house, when we close on it.
When we close on it, that's when you're going to move.
We've had a few nibbles, but no buyer yet.
Mm-hmm.
The other the other day, the Historical Society Board of Directors held a little reception for Sue and me. And Jan put together a plaque with pictures of the town, of the library and the school and the town hall, and so forth, and then a little album of pictures, which was very good. We did a great job doing it, and we shall have it adorn the walls of wherever we wind up in California.
And you have your daughter is out there, is that?
We've got a son and his wife and family, and a daughter out there. And then the other daughter's in Austin, Texas. So we figured that, the first few years they were out there, I hoped they'd come back, but they never.
Yeah.
So we've got to follow them.
They go their own way.
Yeah. But as Sue and I ride around town or around Essex County, we comment this may be the last time we see this, that, or the other thing. And I'm going to miss it. There's something about New England, and particularly this part of New England, that is really quite unique. I think the closest I've come to it in California is a little place called Stinson Beach. Did you ever hear of it?
No.
It's about 25 miles as the crow flies from San Francisco, but to get to it, you have to go over a mountain chain with zigs and zags and so forth. And that way, it's about 30 miles, but it's still a small town. Probably the population is no more than 1,000 or 1,500 in the winter. In the summer, it's got quite a few summer people and a lot of tourists and excellent restaurants. And we have gone out to California each winter for the last 5 or 6, I guess. And we've stayed at a cottage there one time. And in the middle of winter, it's not the greatest place, but no snow. How are we doing, Jan?
Well, you got 33 minutes. So.
Can you think of
I'm beginning to run low.
Dry?
I think we brought up the what do we think of the challenges facing Topsfield? You mentioned perhaps the sewage and water. Of course, you got a good part of the town has water, and of course they're still looking for a greater source. And sooner or later, I'm sure they'll probably tap into it. But that's one thing. Sewage, I'm not sure. I think that as long as where they pass Title V and as far as your septic systems are concerned, that may pretty much hold off forcing people into into a central sewage system. I don't know. I see some of the biggest problem for the town is trying to revitalize and do something with the downtown.
You got a very good point.
It's just, in my viewpoint, they certainly can use some greater retail power down there than what's there now, and I don't know when that's going to happen or if it's going to happen. Certainly, it's not big enough to bring in a huge supermarket chain, and I don't think we want one. But
Sue and I have talked about it, and I'll tell you what I personally think. I think the town needs to license liquor.
I was going to raise that question. That's the one thing in my experience as a moderator that I was the most interesting, being the moderator for that.
I've forgotten how the vote was.
But the vote
against it.
Was against it, but it was not.
It was fairly close.
It was fairly close.
Yeah. All you've got to do really is go to Georgetown, Hamilton, a couple of towns like that where they have little shopping centers.
Yep.
They've got a liquor store. They've got restaurants with liquor licenses.
Yep.
And the downtown is flourishing.
That's
In
right.
Hamilton, for example, you've got a bank, you've got a drugstore, you've got a small supermarket,
Yep.
a liquor store, a Chinese takeout place, a dry cleaner.
Yep.
Georgetown's very much the same.
Jack, I agree with you, and
I don't know why we stick to a Puritan idea when everybody just goes out of town to buy their liquor. And
it interested me, as moderator, because you stand up and you can watch what's going on and see. And where I expected, and I think a lot of people expected, a lot of opposition, and really the liquor, what was being proposed was quite restrictive. Quite restrictive. And but I thought, well, okay, a lot of the old timers in town are gonna get up and just say, ain't no way. And that didn't happen. And it was quite a few of the younger
really,
still who had been in town for a while, but a younger group with younger kids that voted against it.
Gee, that's
and that surprised me.
Yeah.
That surprised me. But I don't think we'll see that brought up again for a while.
Really?
Unless they get somebody organizes a group to really go after it. And I think that's where it failed, is that there wasn't a really an organized enough group that really was trying to push it through to.
You think people put it on and thought it would fly without?
Yeah, and or were afraid for some reason to really get out there and push. And I think that's what it's going to take. And very frankly, the selectmen weren't. They privately had their own feelings, and I don't say what they were, but they didn't get up and push it and say, "Gee whiz, this is the way we're going to revitalize things." And I think that's what it's going to take. Because I agree with you. I think that would help. For instance, I talked to one person who potentially was going to bring in a small business into the downtown area, and it was. I think he would have brought his business in if he could have had one of the limited licenses, in addition to his bakery business. But when the town turned it down, he said,
"Well, it just wouldn't fly."
So,
too bad. When I mentioned water earlier, I was more thinking of the supply of water. Remember last year how we ran dry a couple of times? Actually, we wound up buying water for the pool, truck
Yep,
loads.
truck loads, yep.
We had to take, as I recall it, at least 5,000 gallons, and our pool would evaporate. It would only need about 1,000 gallons or so. So they'd come with a truck, fill the pool up higher than normal, and then let the hose run all over the lawn.
Yeah, yeah.
Because everybody is drawing on the aquifer that the river provides.
That's true.
And
That's true.
this goes up all the way up to, I guess, North Reading,
Yep.
and down to Ipswich.
And you look at that river, come
this
August,
month, yeah,
it's going to be a trickle.
Even with all the rain we had in the spring.
Yeah. This year is better than I've seen it in a long time.
Right.
Yeah, fortunately,
You got your own water.
we got our own little water system, which I sometimes wish I didn't.
Are you still the water commissioner?
No, I resigned my position there. I frankly tried to talk to people into going town water, and it was just a few $1,000s more expensive to bring town water in than to rehab our system. And I got we had 15 members or 18 members at that time, and I needed about 10, maybe 12 to make it economical, and I couldn't get them. I got 7. And now we haven't done much, and we're in the soup, and a lot of people left the system and drilled their own wells.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen there.
How many members have we got now?
13.
13. Yeah. And there is no town water. There must be town water down Salem Street.
As town water was finally brought up, some of the neighbors up that way brought water from the bottom of Salem Road up the hill and across Route 1, and it now terminates just at the corner of Wenham Road and Salem Street, Salem Road.
Corner of Wenham and Salem.
That's where the town water. Then Danvers water comes up into the town of Topsfield and comes up, just about to the edge of Buzz Burroughs' property. Okay?
Yeah.
Now that was done back, before I came to town. That was done back in the late 60s by Mrs. Wellman. When she moved out of her house and built the house down on Salem Road, she wanted town water. Of course, there was no town water. And so she petitioned the legislature for a special act to be able to bring Danvers pipe up the hill to her place. And she paid for it.
But now, are the other people on that section?
And the people that are below her, Dwinell and so on. They're on the Danvers water.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if they're only, I'm sure there's only about 1,000 feet between where one end and the other end, and if they just spent the money, they could hook in, and then they'd have Topsfield water, and then Topsfield would have a cross connection to as a backup in the town. But we still have not brought it down Wenham Road, so and I don't know if we will. That's neither here nor there.
Well, I don't know what other problems the town may face, but
I think the town, the school things, we've just gone through that one. We've spent about $52 million as the 3 towns, 54, whatever, to upgrade Masco, and that if you've driven by that thing, wow.
It looks like the Pentagon.
It sure does. It's quite an undertaking. And that ought to solve that problem for a while.
For quite a while, I should think.
I should think so, because Boxford obviously is still growing leaps and bounds, and so
it's got a lot of land.
And it's got a lot of land, but they're trying to buy up the land to keep it from being developed.
And they've got 2-acre lots. So.
Yeah, and Middleton has been growing quite rapidly.
As a matter of fact, in our time, Topsfield has gone from the most populous to I think we're the least populous.
The least now.
3 towns.
Yeah. And
well, it's much smaller. I think there's only something like 12 square miles.
Yeah.
And Oxford is at least double that. Yeah. And, I don't know about Middleton.
I don't know about Middleton either. But, my experience, that's another experience I've had in town is on the regional school committee. I wasn't involved, but I mean, as a finance committee member, I always found that there was pretty good communication and understanding between the 3 towns on issues as they relate to the regional school committee.
That's interesting because at least in the first 8 or 10 years that I was moderator, it was really a schism that I used to detect between the Topsfield Finance Committee and the Masco School Committee. Mm-hmm. And I can remember going to a meeting of the Topsfield Finance Committee when they were discussing, before a town meeting, they were discussing the Masco budget. And at some point, it got to the point where I said, something's wrong here. Those people are us. It's not we and they. They're us too. And I don't know. I don't think they solved anything, but there was a feeling that they were the enemy.
Yeah, when I say there was good relations, I don't think I was referring to so much between the finance committee and the Masconomet regional committee. There's always been a fair over the years.
Yeah.
When I was there, and even now as moderator, I can see it. There's some friction between the school committee and the finance committee in the towns, or the selectmen in the towns. Where I found better relationships is between the finance committees of the 3 towns getting together.
I see. Oh, yeah.
And working as a, quote, team in dealing with Masconomet, rather than each one going individually trying to deal with Masconomet. So that they get together ahead of time and say, hey, we've all got our problems, but let's try to get together as a group and present what we have as a problem to Masconomet. And that's more recent. That's good.
That's good.
That's good.
I suppose another thing, I don't know that it's a major problem, but it's space for the town offices. But with the highway department up on what's the
Maryknoll.
Maryknoll. I guess they can use the old highway building for
the old highway garage. That's the matter of the town hall and the renovation of the town hall and where to put people. That's a problem. That town hall has been a disgrace for some time. And I mean, it's a lovely old building, and you may the architecture you may like or not like, but it does. You don't see too many like it around.
It's not the most efficient place.
No, and it's awful. It's a terrible place for efficiency. But that's obviously the last town meeting voted funds to at least start to rehab it, and they're going to study longer term what to do. We do have the highway garage. One of the biggest disappointments I had as a selectman, really, was I tried to interest the town in a couple of things. But the one thing that I really tried to interest them in was buying the parish house.
Yeah. That was good.
And I just never could get any support for it. And I turned at that point to the Council on Aging and said, look, you people really are interested in some place to have as a meeting place and place to have your offices and so on. Get behind buying that place, because we can buy it and sure we'll have to put some money into it to rehab it and so on, but it'd be a great place. And, I could get absolutely no interest. The people at the time said, we want to move into the old highway garage down in School Street. Of course, the new highway was still a question mark. It wasn't even.
But you know that new highway department is quite a handsome.
Oh, that's a very nice building. Very, very.
We go up there to take our recycling stuff, and really handsome.
Yeah, no, I've been through it a number of times.
I haven't been through it.
They had their open house here, of course, when they opened it. It's a very nice facility, and not overbuilt, but it's appropriate.
That reminds me. I don't know whether you were a selectman or not at the time when the American Legion was meeting. I guess they were meeting in the firehouse. And I think I kind of boxed you people in because I got calls from who was the Catholic priest then? Father Driscoll and Mr. Green and Ted Williams.
Oh yeah.
And you know this was a matter of days before the annual meeting, and they came up here severally, not all together, and I finally figured out what to do, which boxed you people in, because I called for a non-binding sense of the town meeting, and they went over like gangbusters.
I was
Father Driscoll. You know, I still see him occasionally. He never lets me forget it.
Father Driscoll and I are very good friends.
He's
a nice guy, and I really like him. But we were on opposite sides of the fence on that one, and I was trying to get them to move their meeting place. I forget whether it was a school or the town hall, somewhere. Anyway, we were going to give them space over there, and boy, they would have nothing of that. And I remember getting up on the floor and. Boy, I tell you, I just took a shellac on that thing. No ifs, ands, and buts. God, motherhood, and the American Legion, you know. Don't look around.
The American Legion down, right. Yeah.
But I don't know what they're doing now, to be honest with you.
I don't either. I'm not even sure that they're still in existence.
Oh, I think they are, but you know, with Dick Adams gone.
And Ted.
But anyway.
Ted, there was another one that died when we were away. Just like John Nutter. Shortly before we went to California, was it last year or the year before, I bumped into Ted down in the drugstore, and I asked him how he was doing, and he said, well, as long as Bill stays here, I'll be okay, because, you know, everybody's on medication. And then we went, and Ted died.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, how would you summarize your most interesting experiences in town and as moderator?
That's a pretty tall order, Jan. I suppose that you get a real feeling of, at least I did, I got a real feeling of satisfaction when we got through a fairly long warrant without too much debate or too much, I mean, I shouldn't say without too much debate, because one thing I always felt was part of my job was to keep the town talking, or at least to get them to talk. But we get through a long warrant, and you knew that you had done business and that the town might be a little better off for it. That, I guess, that's pretty inartful, but I guess that would be it. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think so. It's to me, open town meeting is still the ultimate in government, and it always bothers me that not as many people come and show up. It sometimes astounds me that there isn't that great debates on some of these things, particularly some of the budget. The budget.
That's always
has generally, in my experience, has sailed through.
Yeah.
But that also speaks well for the process of how it's put together.
Yeah.
It's put together with a great deal of thought.
And the finance committees do a heck of a good job.
They do a heck of a good job. So, yeah, like you, I mean, once you get through it, you say, hey, people have had their ability to say yay or nay, and we've done our job.
I can remember that on budgets that amounted to quite a few dollars, the biggest arguments came on how to spend $500 for the 4th of July or the Memorial Day Parade.
Yeah, I can remember back again in the early days, there was a lot of contention about mosquitoes spraying, and we would spend a half an hour discussing whether or not we'd spend $2,500 to spray mosquitoes, and then pass those days a $2 or $3 million budget in 15 minutes or 15 seconds. Really.
Yeah, as moderator and before that as a selectman or a finance committee, I learned very early on, don't ever think you know how things are going to go on any particular article. The article that you think is just going to be a no-brainer and sail through, all of a sudden becomes one of great contention, and you get defeated. The only thing that you know with certainty that's going to bring the crowd and bring a very close vote, tremendous contention is leash. I always can. If you want to pack the house, make sure you have a leashing ordinance on the warrant.
I remember Holger Luther talking about the first neighbor that greeted him was a dog. He was against leashing.
Well, thank you both very much for a very interesting discussion.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.